But yeah. Okay, are we ready to start? All good?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our webinar with Sam O'Keefe from Lismore. I'm super excited to have her here. We're just chatting. She has been doing a few of these with technical issues, but we think everyone's mastered those by now, so hopefully we're all good. Welcome all of you that are watching this. We tried to keep it as interactive as possible. So we've got a chat box. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, if you're on a laptop, but you should be able to click on the chat, and then the chat will come up on the side and you can type in there. We'll watch that as it goes through, chat with you. And then there's also a Q&A section. So if you have any questions to ask Sam, pop them in the Q&A. The chat goes quite quickly. So although we will be reading it, we might miss something, whereas the Q&A are specific questions that I'll make sure that we get answered through the session at some point. Already had a couple through by email, so we're weaving those in as well. So that's all good. Then we've got, it's quite good timing, this one, because we've got one of Sam's Chardonnays that we're drinking today, and it's International Chardonnay Day. So for those of you who were celebrating International Tea Day or British Tea Day earlier, time to switch over to the Chardonnay now. And then it's also, this weekend, there's like a whole kind of South African wine thing going on. There's a lot more events, maybe Sam can tell you about some of those later that are happening. A lot more events happening online to do with South African wine. Just, if you've got any left over from this session, you can, of course, drink it at those sessions and join in at those. So yeah, there's a kind of a lot going on. And, we thank you very much for joining our webinar, because we know that there are more and more of these popping up, but we're getting good feedback, so we're keeping on going. So as long as you're enjoying it, we'll keep on going, because we're doing these for you. We're doing these for the winemakers, the producers, to give them an opportunity to talk direct to consumers, and we're also doing it to help support the independent retailers. So we partnered with Corking Wines in York for this, for the webinar, sorry, for the winemaker series. So for this one and the next three, we've got they're all from Corking Wines. Just to point out, we're only doing the 3 Lismore wines today. We're not doing all 12, if you bought the case. So yeah.
Things haven't got that bad in lockdown.
So we've got the 3 wines from Lismore that we're going through. The Age of Grace Viognier. I originally selected the barrel-aged Sauvignon Blanc because it's one of my favourites, and it's I first tried it at the Hen and Flowers in Marlow last year. Absolutely loved it. But then I've had so much, when I announced that I was doing Lismore, I had so much chatter about the Age of Grace Viognier and the Chardonnay that we've gone with those. And the Syrah I love. It means quite a lot to me. When I heard about the fire that Sam experienced last year, I went out for dinner with James, who's actually joined this session. Went out for dinner with him just before Christmas, and we opened the Syrah in a restaurant, because we wanted to do what we could to support Sam. So yeah, anything that you can do to support Sam, do it, because we love her wines, and we hope you do too. And yeah, fantastically, Amelia and Sam met, was it last year that you guys met?
We'd met already before in London, but we were reunited this time. I got to see Sam in South Africa, and we had an epic dinner at the Fat Butchers, so you can imagine what that entailed. And yeah, we had, because like Sam, we definitely had the same, we had the estate Chardonnay, which I adore, and I'm so I'm living vicariously through you guys. But we had a different, we had the estate Viognier and the estate Syrah, didn't we?
Yeah.
So it was different. So I'm intrigued to see how these are different and how they're showing now. But yeah, that was such a lovely dinner. And we were, of course, with Erica Obermeier and Ian Naude. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was, I know that feels like a long time ago, but this is lovely. It's brought back some really happy memories from this week, like going through the photos and things. Yeah.
And Sam, you're not originally from South Africa. You're from California.
Yeah, I'm from California, where Amelia's sitting now. It's so lovely to see the blue skies. We're headed into winter here, so it's getting darkly, and when I'm doing webinars with the UK and the sun's still out and it's so nice. But I immigrated to South Africa 20 years ago on a mission to kind of find another way of life, and I obviously found it. It hasn't been easy all the time, but it has certainly been worthwhile, and I haven't regretted it a single day. It's been really great.
What did you find the biggest contrast between the way of life in South Africa and California?
You know what? Funny enough, coming from LA to Cape Town, the climate is very similar. The topography is very similar. Yep. The attitude of many people and is very similar because they're both sort of beachy, cosmopolitan cities that, it's a lot of people from all over the world. The work ethic and depending on which side of this you sit, you would think it's positive or negative, but I had come out of television where I was working 100-hour weeks and I was completely burnt out. And there were two adverts that I think epitomized this. And there was a American banking advert that had this man walking into a parking lot as the city lights were there. It was dark and he was alone with his briefcase, and it said like, Morgan Stanley, we work we work as hard as you do. And then in South Africa, people really work to live rather than live to work. And they value their families and they value time with family, and they're productive, and but they will never let work overtake what's important. And there was an advert for a bank here with a father walking down a beach holding his little son's hand, and it said, Standard Bank, we work so you don't have to. And I think, I often say South Africa is America in the 1970s. It's at least California in the 1970s. It's a place where people work and they're creative and they're hardworking, but at the same time, they really value time and value their lives. And it's a culture shock if you're an American and you expect people to be productive. And if you want to get someone, if you want to get someone on the phone at 3:00 on a Friday, forget it. They're already at the beach having what we call sundowners here. Forget it. It's not happening. And so as an American, that's a huge culture shock. Yeah. But at the same time, it was exactly what I was looking for, is just, a life with meaning that wasn't just work. And then I went and I found myself a job that, is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Me and my big mouth, but it is a job 7 days a week, 24 hours a day that I can share with my family and my friends and just be part of, have a purpose. Yeah.
Sounds great. Sounds like a really interesting move, because obviously if you wanted to go into wine, California has a whole range of things you can go into. So changing the lifestyle and choosing that lifestyle, I don't know whether you chose it beforehand, but it seems like a really important thing to do, especially I would go after that any day. Go on.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to, because we're going to move on to tasting notes for the Viognier, if we may first. I just wanted to let people know what we'll do is we'll try and get the 3 wines at least tasted within the 45 minutes. So then if we run over a little bit, some of you have to go, then fine. But, we're kind of going to play it by ear and see how it goes. And Sam, at any point, if you need to go, just shout.
Yes.
Right, so let me get rid of this. Yeah, because you can't see, obviously when you've got a virtual background, you can't see what's behind you. So yeah, so first of all we're going to the Viognier. Sam, do you wanna talk us through it?
Yeah. So the Age of Grace is a very special wine. When basically Lismore was purchased and it was an old dairy. I couldn't afford a wine farm. I could afford a piece of land in the middle of nowhere, and it was all very idealistic. But you know, most of you have heard the story, and long story short, we planted vineyards where no one had planted vineyards before. Now, the two real standouts as far as terroir expression were the Syrah and the Viognier. And the Lismore Viognier was born. It was limited. There's only 0.8 of a hectare. I could only make 2,500 to 3,000 bottles a year. And so as the brand grew and I had sort of this, you know, very loyal following, it would sell out every year. And by 2015, I had found this vineyard in Elgin that was on quartz soils. And Elgin has a similar continental climate to Greyton, but a very different soil profile in this vineyard, where mine is shale, like heavy, masculine, thick, you know, weighty soils. Here you had this like rose quartz, pink crystalline vineyard. So I bought some grapes in 2015 to make them side by side and really understand how much of Lismore Viognier was me as a winemaker and how much of it was terroir. And in the end, the two wines were so special but so distinctive that I had made the very risky decision of bottling a second Viognier. You know, Viognier isn't a usual wine that people produce to begin with, and then I went out and released another one. And it was a time in my life and in my business where there were a lot of changes. My name is Samantha Grace O'Keefe. And when I was growing up in California, the people who knew and loved me used to call me Grace. And so like it was a nickname that only the insiders knew, you know. And so I decided to call this wine the Age of Grace because it was like a whole new chapter opening up to me. And I can tell you that it started in 2015, which wasn't that long ago, with 2,000 bottles. And we're at about 10,000 to 12,000 bottles a year and growing. It's a wine that just people have connected with. So it is Viognier grown on rose quartz. It's made in what's called an oxidative style. I expose the juice to lots of air at the juice phase, exactly like I do with my other wines. And you have a wine that's just, it's aromatic, but not overly so. It's nice and rich and textured on the palate. And it has this beautiful long fresh finish from those beautiful soils. There's like a crystalline minerality, you know, that's on your palate. And I just think it's a wine that a lot of people just enjoy. It's a complete wine. You know, it doesn't matter that it's made of Viognier.
And how would you say the two personalities of the wine are, the estate one versus the Age of Grace?
The estate wine is huge. It is, so the Age of Grace is also irrigated vineyards. I try to be delicate in saying that because it's often a bad word. I try to say like traditionally, commercially farmed, I don't know. But I actually think it benefits this wine because the Lismore fruit is dryland farmed in clay. You know, it is this intense, concentrated, voluptuous wine. You know, I often, when I only had my three white wines, the Chardonnay, the Viognier, and the Barrel Sauvignon, I would say, you know, I have these three daughters, they're all beautiful, but then, you know, once the blonde with the big boobs walks in, which is the Viognier, everybody forgets my other pretty daughters, you know? And that's how, you know, the Viognier has always been. It just, everybody loves my other wines until they look at this, but it's over the top. You know, it's not the kind of wine you want to sit and drink like, you know, on a sunny afternoon. It's a powerful pairing wine. It's a powerful, you know, dinner wine, but it's really concentrated. It's big. So the Age of Grace is light. It's fresh. You know, where you have dried apricot in Lismore Viognier, you have peaches in Age of Grace. Where you have intense fresh ginger in the Lismore Viognier, you have candied ginger in the Age of Grace. And the soils of Lismore have always given this like bacon fat smokiness to the estate wine, which is not there in the Age of Grace. You have this minerality that's very much there, like I said, like a crystalline texture. And so it's just a fresher, it's a 2-bottle wine. And yet it's a serious wine, you know, and by no means is it a quaffing wine. It's made with all the love and serious I give to the other wines. It's 15% in concrete eggs and the rest are all in barrel. But it is a real beautiful expression of a unique terroir that is totally opposite of the Lismore site.
Do you think that so you talked about the texture and you talked about kind of the peaches, is that representative of the terroir? Is it specific to your site or in other sites in South Africa as well?
Well, peaches and candied ginger and floral notes it's a typicity of the variety, you know. I mean, that's what you would expect from a Viognier. And yet, you know, this site with these pink crystalline soils just give you this like fresh, breathtaking, with actually quite a nice fresh acidity as well. You know, some Viogniers can be quite oily, and this one isn't. You know, there's a nice clean finish to this wine. And I think it's why, you know, when you said people were saying we want to do the Age of Grace, it has garnered such a loyal following, and it has a lot of by the glass listings there in the UK and some in the US as well. And so yeah, I just think it was a risk, and it was really silly for me to put out a second Viognier under my brand, and yet you know, the Age of Grace was born. The next chapter like opened wide up for me, so that's cool, you know. And I mean, it has a special place in my heart now because of it, and I give it a lot of love and care.
Did people think you were mad when you planted Viognier?
Yeah, and they still do. You know, it's a common thing for me to have winemakers walk up to me and say, "Don't you find it hard to sell Viognier? Like, no one wants to buy it, no one wants to drink it." And I'm like, "Oh, that's funny, because it sells out every year for me." You know, and I don't know, who knew? I tried this thing in the middle of nowhere. No one had ever heard of me. And I don't know. I mean, it's this blessing that came from God that this 0.8 of a hectare small block just became the flag, you know, from which Lismore grew. And I'm very proud of it. And it's a special thing, and I can't explain it. I'm like Viognier girl now, and I never set out to be, you know.
Do you find that you're teaching the French how to make Viognier wines now?
Oh God, I wouldn't ever say that. No, I have French friends in Condrieu, and if you're looking, I didn't say that. She said it. Yeah, no, I didn't say that. Look, what I can say is that my French friends really admire my Viognier, and I certainly, I think if anything, I look to them. I you know, you won't believe it, but when I started making Viognier, there was no Google. Like, that's how old I am. And I like went to Jancis Robinson's, like, you know, PDF and looked up Condrieu and to see like what they actually do in Condrieu and how they make Viognier. And it was like, well, they barrel ferment it and they age it for 18 months. And, you know, so I just sort of followed, well, if that's how they do it, then I'll do it. But I reach out to them, and especially those in Condrieu, and I ask for their advice, and I try to get tips, because at this stage, I was kind of doing the same thing over and over, and it was working, but I wanted it to be better. And I experimented with first the plastic polyurethane eggs, and then with concrete eggs to just add some extra texture. And yeah, now I'm playing around with a little bit of new oak, which it hasn't had new oak ever. And yeah, now it's time to just try to perfect it and to do better, I hope.
Well, Viognier was what seduced me to your wines at a swig tasting. I don't know how many years ago it was. I worked for them and your wines arrived, and I was like, oh my goodness. But I'm a huge Viognier fan, Rhone fan, and I think it's you know, of course you're going to get certain characteristics, but again, like with wine from everywhere, like it's not that you're trying to do a Rhone wine. You can just see what works. It's respecting that balance of like technical stuff, plus your own personality, plus what the terroir gives you, you know, being in South Africa. Would you say, because you said when you made the two Viogniers, you were interested to see what the terroir would give as opposed to you as a winemaker. What I've definitely like noticed in all your wines is texture is a very big thing for you. Would you say that's like the main thing? If you are wanting to make any kind of imprint on the wine, that would be the main thing?
It is the main thing. When people say, if you had one word, what would it be? And I always say texture. You know, I often feel I work with aromatic grapes. I work with Sauvignon Blanc and Viognier, and two wines that I think a lot of winemakers, especially New World winemakers, work very hard to just lift and enhance the aromatics. You know, they have so much to give. They can live without some of that in order to have the trade-off of texture. That's my philosophy when I work with those grapes. So, you know, with the Viognier, for example, if I were to use the New World techniques that would enhance the natural phenolics of those grapes, it would be even bigger. It would be your grandma's perfume, you know, but you'd have nothing beyond that, you know, so you just have this powerful, you know, aromatic bomb. But, you know, often you guys in London, you're standing in a wine show with 600 to 800 wines or more, and aromatics are a dime a dozen. They actually come quite cheap. You know, it's what follows, you know, it's when it goes into your mouth and you go, oh, wait, like, wow, that's taking up a lot of space in my mouth, as my 10-year-old once said, you know, and that's exactly what you want. And then obviously having finished, having a wine that has a very distinctive beginning, middle, and end is very important to me. And you have to sacrifice some of the beginning in order to have some middle and some end, you know, and so that is my philosophy when I'm working with those very aromatic grapes.
Well, we've got, talking of swig, Amelia, Robin says hi. He dropped me a note to say hi to you, Sam. Please get in touch. Yeah. But we've got some questions about the Viognier, so if I go through those before we move on to the Chardonnay. We've got a general question about acidification. Do you add anything, or has it got high enough acidity as it is?
Look, you know, we generally, both in my Lismore vineyard and in the Elgin vineyard, have a much lower pH and a much higher natural acidity than most other areas. If it's a bad year and just it comes in funny, I might need to adjust a bit just to keep things healthy in the ferment. Just, you know, I think ultimately my first job is to make sure that I have healthy wine that makes it into the bottle. But I will say that these two sites, you know, there isn't a lot of cool climate Viognier planted in South Africa, so I don't have a lot of examples to compare it to. But in our Cape South Coast, which is our cool climate area, we get a nice bright acidity and a nice low pH. So yeah.
Is it at a higher altitude?
Both sites are, yes, Elgin and Greyton, but it's more the diurnal temperature shift. Both areas are apple areas, so you have warmer days and cold nights. Yeah.
Great. And we had a question about, is it a wild ferment?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Are all of your wines wild?
All of my wines are wild. When the vineyard was younger, I would need to pick quite ripe. I would do multiple picks, and the last pick, and I'm very about this, the last pick would be quite ripe to get those really intense flavors, especially on the Lismore fruit. And because you're picking so ripe, I would need to use commercial yeast because it's high alcohol. So alcohol is toxic to natural yeast, and it would kill it off. So I would do natural on the first two picks, but the last pick I would use a yeast. But in the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, I actually can't get the sugars that high. I don't need to let it hang and let it get that ripe. As the vineyards have become older, it's coming in at a much lower alcohol naturally. And so I've just let it run, is what I say. You know, just let the wine do what it needs to do. And the last pick of Viognier has always been the only batch I inoculate with commercial yeast, and I just don't find that I need to do it anymore as the vineyards have become older.
That's amazing that you can do that, like to, you know, control that you don't have control, or to not control but you have control.
Yeah, well, in 2013 was the first year where I was like waiting for the flavors to develop, because Viognier, it's very important to taste the grapes in the vineyard. They taste like Chardonnay for a very long time, and then one day they taste like Viognier. And you have to kind of be there all the time tasting through the vineyards until they taste like Viognier. And as I said, there was a time where that would take, 15% alcohol. So I would pick earlier picks to be able to blend it and make a lower alcohol wine. But I needed higher sugars, and not because of the sugar, because it didn't taste like Viognier at the grape stage. And in 2013, it was Viognier, and yet the sugars were really low, and which meant a low alcohol. And I actually not only thought it was a fluke, I thought it was a flaw. Like, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to have a 13% Lismore Viognier. That can't happen. And
yeah, like decrease, yeah, major decrease, yeah.
And I mean, I most winemakers talk a lot of shit at these things, and I always tell like really honest stories, because I was like confused, and I thought, no, I have to almost lie up and tell people that the alcohol's higher, so that they don't expect this of me any other year. This was just a weird year. That was 2013, but ever since then, actually, it just doesn't get that high anymore. The vineyards have aged, and they're mature, and the grapes don't need to hang that long in order to develop the right flavors.
Yeah. We've also got a question, getting quite technical now for some of our viewers, but hopefully you're still with us. Do you get any stuck ferments? Do you have any problems with that?
With Viognier? I do this year. Like, I didn't have enough problems this year, okay? Like honestly, God was like, I don't know. Life seems too easy for her. I think I need to give her a stuck ferment with Viognier. Not generally, no. I feed it, I stir it, I love it, and it takes a while, especially with natural yeast to ferment. But in general, I've never had a problem. I had a very slow ferment in 2017 that was worrying, but it finished. But this year, again, we're only in May. It could be, it could be just a slow ferment, but given all of the other challenges I have, I would just like it to be.
You're just like drawing a line.
So I'm officially calling it stuck as of today. Because I'm irritated that it's not just doing its job and letting me move on. But not as a practice now.
Okay, and we talked earlier about talking to people in Condrieu about how they're making their wines. Someone's asked, do you talk to Yolanda about Viognier as well, kind of to get the new world perspective?
In all honesty, not often. I sort of am on my own mission here in the New World. In South Africa, like I said, I grew that wine, and I made it in a style that I read, in Johnson's Romance's book, and I didn't ask any opinion. Nobody was really making Viognier. This is 2007, 2008 here in South Africa. People had planted it. They were blending it with Syrah. Some people were, doing a lot of new wood, but they were also in really hot climates. So I was kind of on my own, and I was really surprised that people connected with that wine in the way that they did. I didn't anticipate that, and so I just kept doing the same thing over and over. And as I said, in this first few years, I was just grateful that people liked the wine, and I didn't want to change anything, But as here we are 12 years later, and as I said, I've worked very hard to improve the wine every year as I've become a better winemaker. And so I generally don't speak to a lot of New World winemakers about Viognier. I do have, Christine Viognier and Paul Amsterdam of Domaine Georges Vernet have become friends. They're colleagues in the same UK portfolio. And so that's a nice person to check in with. Yeah.
Well, we're getting.
Sorry, Soma.
No, it's okay.
Out of curiosity, because it was interesting how you said you looked at the tome that is the Jancis Robinson Atlas of Wine to help guide you with the making Viognier. How much knowledge, have you done wine courses? What, because your background was originally in media and production in LA. So when you arrived in South Africa in 2003, how much did you actually know about winemaking?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about winemaking. I knew a lot about winemaking. Look, my background actually, at Berkeley, I studied development. I wanted to be Christine Lagarde. I wanted to work for the World Bank and solve the problems of the world. And I was really good in chemistry, and in choosing what I majored in, I decided not to go into the sciences, and I decided to focus on the developing world. I ended up in television by accident, and I was a very resentful television employee. And as I think anybody in Los Angeles, you might be watching, might testify to. And I often say I sort of resented my way up the ladder, as I think is typical of like LA. And at 29, I just thought, like, what am I doing with my life? And I'm so off track. How did I get so off track? And so I left, and, I wandered here, and I really obviously wanted to maybe work for an NGO and, help figure out, help be part of the solution of the challenges that South Africa faces. And in the end, I ended up being a winemaker, but I think, and a farmer. As a farmer, we work a lot with a lot of the challenges that South Africa faces, but just one person at a time. And so I certainly think I've been part of that solution. But as a winemaking, the chemistry came really easy to me. I think I enjoyed wine. So a lot of wine is, does it taste good or doesn't it? And yeah, I don't know, it came naturally. And luckily, guys, I planted vines in the middle of nowhere, and it could have grown really crap grapes. And in the end, it grew some really nice grapes, and I obviously didn't screw it up, and that's a total fluke that I didn't screw it up in those early years, and people connected with it. And who knows, the same grapes made in a different style might have like missed, like just, and something about time, place, and I guess purpose. I have this purpose, and I didn't realize that was going to be my life's purpose, but it is, and I love it.
Yeah. I think everyone else is loving it too. We're getting lots of comments saying how much they're enjoying the Viognier. So yeah, keep making it. Do you want to take us through the Chardonnay? Okay. So where the Age of Grace that you all are tasting is from a neighboring appellation and a vineyard that I found only in 2015. And I've just told you about the Estate Reserve Viognier. You have 17, right? Is that right? The vintage that we're all tasting? Yeah. Now you have Greyton's terroir in your glass. This is, this was a hilly mountain, about an hour and a half outside of Cape Town. Basically, for those of you who know South Africa, it's inland from Hermanus, directly up at 325 meters, in a place where no one had ever grown wine seriously and commercially before. And it really, in the end, grew this very distinctive wine. And the Chardonnay is made, it's 100% barrel fermented, again, made in that oxidative style. It doesn't have any new oak. In the standard Chardonnay, it's made in 300-liter barrels, so not the tiny barriques, but in slightly bigger, but not large format. And it's just a wine that, again, has this concentration, and that concentration is from the shale and clay soils. It's from the fact that there's no irrigation. It's dryland farm, so my bunches are literally these tiny bonsai bunches, that are just full of power. And I press them, and I put them into barrel. I let them naturally ferment, and it's on the solids for the full 11 months. And then, just when I think maybe this isn't the year that it's going to be okay, then, we bottle it, and Lismore Chardonnay, vintage after vintage, just has such a distinctive sense of place and such power, and yet lots of fruit and lots of freshness, and yet, no new oak to really get in the way.
I love Yeah, I'm looking back on my notes, like which I made at the Fat Butchers, and that was an epic meal. And I just wrote, like, it was, for me, it was also just the texture on this wine, just also again was phenomenal, and just so mouth and we had all these different kinds of food on the table, and it just, again, you could really tell the beginning, the middle, and the end, and it just could stand up to all these flavors. It didn't take over, it just held its own. And I put in my book, a real crowd pleaser. Like, I think, you know, I've got friends who are all kinds of spectrum of Chardonnay fans, and yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, you know, it when I first started making this wine in the style that I made it, it was during the anything but Chardonnay, you know, time. And so people would immediately say, no, sorry, I don't drink Chardonnay. I don't want to taste it, you know? And I'd say taste it. I don't think it's Chardonnay that you have a problem with. It may just be that, you know, there's sometimes too much oak. And so it was very unique in its day. I mean, we're going back to 2006 with the Chardonnay, for having no new oak. And that was different then. It's become very fashionable to make wine in that style. But, you know, it really, it's rich, voluptuous, and textured. So for the people who like their big Chardonnays,
yeah,
it gives a lot of power. And yet it doesn't have, you know, any real distinguishable oak. You know, for anyone who picks up toastiness, which sometimes people do, that's actually just lees contact. It's 11 months in older barrels on the lees. And so you do have some, like, you know, kind of toasty notes, but it's not toast from a barrel. It's like the toast
right.
With marmalade.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that you could get like toast from like the lees. I mean, I always knew that lees could be used for like texture and things, but you actually get a toastiness.
But it's not toast like barrel toast. It's like toast like you have at breakfast, you know? It's
right. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Just that nice little savory, you know,
mealy, like a mealy kind of, yeah.
Like
mealy
wheaty, not white toast, wheat toast.
Yeah.
Brown toast, brown bread, toasted.
Not gluten-free bread like over here.
No, and not rye. Okay, brown bread, toasted, no butter, with marmalade. That's where we're at. Okay, we're not like slightly savory textured, but not like toast with butter. Not that.
Someone even just wrote, I'm not a fan of Chardonnay, my worst nightmare, but this one is really fab.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Another convert.
I'm going for fab. I channel fab when I make the wine. That's what I do. Yeah.
Love it.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite a challenge trying to convert all the anything but Chardonnays, but yeah, it's something that I've been successfully doing with wines like this. It makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it does. I think, you know, unfortunately, with any wine, I guess, you know, I mean, it's like the people who say they don't drink white wine or don't drink red wine. They just haven't had the right wine, you know.
I've converted my landlord to red. That's my biggest achievement this lockdown, because I live in like a little gated garden. I live above the garage of my landlord's. And every single night we have happy hour. It's great.
That's Los Angeles.
And, you know, right? Yeah, living above a garage. The glamour, guys. And my big thing, I think, during lockdown is getting this, she's in her 60s, this tenacious white wine only drinker. She's loving reds. She, you know, I've got her into like the Gammets and Pinot Noirs and the chilled reds. But yeah, and yesterday she was falling in love with a Pinot from Oregon. And oh yeah, by the end of lockdown, baby, she's gonna be swigging the Malbecs.
Yeah, I just wanted to let people know, because there'll be some people on here who haven't heard, you know, we keep talking about you've been through a lot and there's a lot going on, and you know, God's not looking favorably down on you at the moment with your stuck ferment, but you know, there's some people here who aren't aware that, you know, after moving to South Africa, making a name for yourself, making some fantastic wines, high risk strategy, but doing really well, and becoming, you know, well known across Europe and the States, that you had an awful fire last year. It was last year, and you know, wiped out all your vines. Thankfully, you and your family got out fine, healthy. You know, that's obviously the main thing, but it must be absolutely devastating to lose everything. And you know, it's given me shivers even talking about it. So you know, apologies for bringing that up, but I just want to let people know that, you know, it's something that you have been overcoming, and the people around you have been so supportive and helping you through that. And you know, as Amelia said earlier, it seems to be kind of the South African vibe is to get through things and support each other and help each other, rather than the American way. So, you know, maybe tell us a little bit about how, because I heard some people were giving you some grapes. Is that right?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say that I would hope that anywhere in the world, people would come together at a time like that. I think because I was so geographically isolated, it particularly caught me off guard. You know, had the support that I had, the way that the industry just overwhelmingly came together. And okay, so basically on the 17th of December, right before Christmas, a fire came down from the mountain, a bushfire that had been burning for a week, and yeah, my cellar is gone, my 19 vintage was destroyed, and my house and everything in it, and some of my animals as well. And luckily, you know, some of my animals survived, and my kids and me and my staff are safe. Obviously, I was in shock, and all I could think about was how I put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And yet, while I was just trying to figure out where, you know, what I'm going to wear the next day, I mean, you know, people were showing up not only with clothes and toothbrushes, and I wouldn't bring someone a toothbrush. It was so thoughtful. You know, I mean, people like thought of just stuff that, like, I think I'd just bring wine. You know, I'd like show up with like alcohol, like, sorry, you lost everything, here's a bunch of alcohol, you know. And I mean, the things that people thought through just in those minutes, in those hours. But while that was happening with my kids, and we were trying to find the dogs, and then the dogs were burned and injured, and, you know, and all of that, the wine industry behind the scenes was, because we're weeks away from harvest at this stage. And there was no way, absolutely no way, that I would have been able on my own to pull it together and make a 2020 harvest in the face of all of that. And I mean, there just isn't. And in retrospect, I know that even more than I knew it, you know, then. I just lost the 19 vintage, and without a 20 vintage, obviously Lismore would be gone. And so while I was trying to figure all that other stuff out, the South African wine industry were banding together and sending each other emails and calling each other. And it, you know, Alex Dale of Bradford Dell was kind of the figurehead of it all. And Andrew Molyneux, as the chairman of the Cape Winemakers Guild, was handling that side of it. And basically they started building these spreadsheets of donated grapes and cellar space. And I've got these barrels, and I don't have grapes or barrels, but I've got time, and I can drive, and I can, you know, offer credit for bottles, and I can, you know, offer services. And you know, at some point in early January, Alex basically kind of said, you know, okay, right, you know, I'm handing you this spreadsheet, you need to get your shit together because you're about to start harvest, you know. And I mean, when those first grapes came in, because I'm usually so late because I'm from a cool climate area, and now we have donated grapes from the Swartland, I didn't have a bed. I didn't know where I was going to stay. And yet they basically were like, listen, here, we're picking, you better figure it out. You know? So yeah, so it's, what can I say? I don't have words. I don't have words for what has happened. I thank you, and tears, and it was really overwhelming. And given how I'm somebody who came in from the outside, I'm geographically separated from so many of these wine regions. It really was so beyond anything I could imagine. And I really hope that if that were to happen anywhere in the world, that the wine industry, I had messages from California, from Chile, from Australia, from France, from winemakers all over the world. The agents who support me, and agents who don't even sell Lismore wine, we're doing promotions in the world. Like, if you buy a bottle of Lismore wine, you know, I'll give her 10 rand or whatever. You know, it's really, guys, I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have the smile on my face. I wouldn't be sitting here. And so I don't, and we're not done yet. I still have a stuck Viognier. So, yeah.
But you do have a 2020 thanks, because I was watching the interview with Tim Atkin the other day, and it was just amazing hearing how some of the grapes came from Andrea, some of the grapes came from other people. So someone compared it to almost like 2020 will be like the collaboration album.
Yeah.
And like, it could be like your most epic, stellar, fabulous wine ever. You know, I'm like, that's like, you know, that is actually kind of like something really exciting, whilst obviously, what are you trying to do whilst that's kind of fermenting and maturing and that kind of thing? What are you able to do now in terms of salvaging what you have and in terms of working with Lismore estate?
Well, now, I mean, now that harvest was winding down, it's obviously time to now clean up. I mean, Lismore is still a disaster site. You know, the cellar is still a toxic, burned nothing with hoops, you know, barrel hoops piled in a pile. The house is a disaster. The vineyards, you know, vineyards are very resilient, as anyone tries to tell you, but, you know, some of them that weren't burned to, you know, rye wood, which is barbecue wood for those of you who don't know rye, tried to push and come back to life. And yet, you know, the studies are not very promising in Australia. They say that, you know, often the vine kind of gives everything it can to just push and be resilient and come back, but they usually die in the long term. So I don't know right now. You know, as I said, so it's 17th of December, right before Christmas, this all happens. And within 3 weeks, I was in an empty rented house an hour and a half away with my burned dogs with grapes coming, you know, and in a cellar that, you know, was not mine. And so that's just slowed down. So I actually haven't even had a moment of reflection. I haven't had a moment of kind of doing anything but just getting through each day. And the time is starting to rebuild. And you know, the time is now where I have to look and figure it out. And I'm very determined. You know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the cellar will be back up by the end of July, if I have anything to do about it. If not, definitely the end of August. And the house will be a longer, you know, more complicated story. But you know, I'm gearing up to replant right now, and that also helps me get through all of this. You know, is I wake up every day with a lot of things to do.
If anyone can get through that list of things to do and make that cellar happen next year, it would be you. Yeah. As this, not trying to sound like a Pollyanna, would you do anything differently? Because it's almost like it's like a restart, regrowth. Like, would you plant different things? Would you, like, is this almost like, okay, awful,
yeah,
but now it's like fresh new start? What would you change? What would you keep the same?
Yeah, it's a good question. And you know, my very first instincts, like that minute, because people, you know, it's funny, in the face of tragedy, I mean, for any of us who've lived through tragedy, everyone tries to make jokes, you know, and like be lighthearted. And the first thing is like, oh, you know, we never liked that cellar anyway. You know, obviously you needed to rebuild it. You know, I mean, this is an opportunity for a fresh start. And so my first instinct though was like, I want it back exactly the way it was. I don't want anything different. But now with time and reflection, I think that time has proven that Syrah and Viognier and Chardonnay are really well suited to the terroir. But we made a lot of mistakes planting those vineyards, and I had very low yields, and I didn't nurture them properly for dryland vineyards. I was given a lot of confused advice in the early years because South Africa had not been in any sort of terroir. So the consultants that were trying to help me plant and give me advice didn't understand my site. Well, 16 years later, I understand my site. And I understand that a lot of the advice was bad advice, not of their fault, but because they were giving me advice of what they understood. You know, I basically in a very cool climate, but those rocky soils and dryland farm vineyards need to be farmed like dryland farm vineyards, you know? And so I now work with dry farm consultants, you know, people, Rosa Kruger and Jeff Joubert, who's this, you know, man from the Swartland and from Wellington and from all of those areas, even though I'm in a rainy summer rainfall, cool climate area. So I made a lot of mistakes with the vineyards, and I certainly, as I replant new vineyards, will be able to nurture those vineyards and get a lot more out of them, and have a healthier, balanced fruit because of it. You know, the cellar, I just built the cellar 3 years ago. It was perfect. I'll make some small tweaks, but you know, it obviously there'll be so many, I think, just changes to the way that I see life from now on. You can't go through something like this and not be completely changed. Yeah. But let's talk about wine.
Yeah. I know. Well, and actually, yeah, we've had like lots of lovely comments. Someone said the best tasting I've ever attended was in Verity in Glasgow on the 28th of May.
Yes. Ian, I just want to say I was Ian's 4th Twitter follower. I just want to say that, okay? I remember Ian, and he had 3 Twitter followers, and I was number 4. Bam. That's my. I'm sure he has thousands now. He had just joined Twitter, but yeah, I feel very proud that I was part of the wave. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Hello, Ian.
Oh. So wait, whoops. We said we were going to do all 3 wines in the first 40, whoops. Oh yeah, so I guess we should move on to the red.
I'm sorry.
The red, and then we can talk about
the heart-wrenching fire story, but obviously, you know what I need right now? I need to be able to just be a winemaker and think about wine and talk about wine. And so it makes me so happy when I just get to be me and talk about what I love. And obviously I understand that everyone wants to hear about the fire, and I've had so much support. I would be doing a disservice if I didn't as often as I could thank everybody and tell that part of the story. But I just really like talking about wine, and I'd much rather do that.
Yeah, okay. We want to do that too. And you know, yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I know it must be so painful. So the Syrah. Now, the Syrah, I was blown away by, because I think when I bought it, I didn't realize how much more like a premium Rhone style wine it would be than what you might get from another South African Shiraz. It blew me away. Do you want to talk us about it?
Sure. I'm gonna first take that, because it's such a nice thing that you said, and say that what South Africa offers, I'm going to do a plug for South African wine to everybody, is premium wines at a price that you don't expect to have such a nice wine. And this weekend for South Africa Wine Weekend, like, drink South African, good South African wine. Okay, so Amelia. So right. So as I said, I tell this story that in the beginning, I planted these vineyards, and I have to be honest, 16 years ago, I didn't realize I was going to be growing something so distinctive and so unique. I thought I'd be growing Chardonnay that if I wanted to, I could make a Stellenbosch Californian Chardonnay. If with the Syrah, I would be making a Shiraz. I knew I was cool climate. I knew I had this unique terroir, but I didn't really understand how that would manifest itself. I didn't know enough, and there weren't enough examples in South Africa. I mean, all of the cool climate regions here, we were all kind of planting at that time. So when the Syrah first started coming off the vineyards, I was going back to ripening and alcohol, I was trying to let it hang so that it would be this kind of 14.5% alcohol South African Shiraz, and it just wasn't happening. And I was trying to make it in a South African Shiraz style. I was destemming it 100%. I invested in like an odd new barrel here and there, and it was nice. It wasn't necessarily very distinctive, and people enjoyed it, but it was kind of Lismore's wine. And I had very low yields because the slopes that vineyard that I have about 3.5 hectares, the slopes that those vineyards are in are so rocky, and as I said, not probably well nurtured in the beginning, that I get like, you know, 2 tons a hectare. And then the Syrah takes so long to ripen in my very cool climate that the baboons come in at the very end. Literally the night before I need to plant, the baboons take all my fruit like the night before. So I was at the point where I thought, I'm wasting my time and money growing Syrah. I need to just pull it out, and I'll just plant the white wine, you know. And it's white wine. It all ripens at the same time, so we're in the vineyards. So the baboons, you know, are chased away. And then from 2012, I started experimenting with whole bench fermentation, and like it was this like moment, you know? Like, holy crap, what is this, you know? I took like something totally ordinary that like just wasn't, it had no sense of place, it had no sense of self. It was, you know, that like really brainy, pretty girl that is just putting on too much makeup and just trying and just doing it all wrong, you know, until she you know? And there was just this moment where, you know, like I didn't have any money left. I'd blown it in all these different ways of trying to make wine that I shouldn't have been making, and I couldn't afford new barrels, and I used whole bunches, and all of a sudden I was making a wine that was so different. I actually thought it was a bit too different. So like
you did the freak fly.
Sorry?
It's the one that let its freak fly.
Yeah. It's literally, so my life changed, okay, and Lismore changed, and everybody's perception of me, all of a sudden I'm like a Syrah maker, and like, who knew, you know? And that all happened like a few years ago. But okay, so again, I only have so much, and I'm growing so little that I then had to start buying in fruit. But I started looking for vineyards in special places, in cool climate places, and I decided to just park off in this corner of the South African wine world that nobody had any space in, which is like super bright, textured, cool climate, like really leaning in to my terroir. And the wine that's in your glass, and I'm sorry for those of you that you don't have and you've never tasted the reserve wines, because I keep kind of moving between the two. But I think that it's an important distinction and an evolution of how I started buying in fruit, and how my own terroir influenced the way that I grow, that I make, you know, wines from other sites. And so I have to be honest, in the first couple of years, there were a lot of people that were like, wow, this is amazing. And then there are other people that kind of like, I don't understand this wine. You know, like, what are you doing here? And I was like, I know what I'm doing, and I understand the wine. So that's all that matters. And you haven't like gotten it yet, you know? And long story short, here we are with the wine in your glass, 2017, which is from Elgin fruit and Greyton fruit. It's 40% whole bench fermented, and it's made in these large wooden vats and very gently pumped over. And you have a wine that is like so bright, but it's textured, and yet it has power. But why does it have power given that it's so fresh? You know, I hope that it speaks with the same language of all of the other wines that I make. And I just think it's a really cool example of what else South Africa can do. You know, we do so many things so well, and we have such a beautiful spectrum of terroir, and this just now creates its own space on that spectrum. Yeah.
How would you describe the personalities then of this Syrah versus the one we had together, which was the reserve Syrah?
Like as much as people love it, and it does so well with, I mean, all my wines do well with the critics. Thank you to all the critics out there. Thank you, because you helped me pay my school fees. The estate reserve one is so specific, especially now that I don't try to do anything else with it, that I think it's almost a bit geeky. So it's super light, it's super floral, it is ethereal, And for those people who want ethereal and in the mood for ethereal, it's like, whoa, this is amazing. But sometimes you don't want ethereal. You actually just want a really nice wine that like comforts you, you know? And so I don't think necessarily that the estate reserve is better. It's more ethereal. It's special because there's nothing, and I promise you, there is nothing in South Africa grown that tastes like that wine. And I'm very proud of that. It's the epitome of my terroir. And yet you don't always want to like work so hard and have your brain like, you know, have to think through all these things. I think that the Syrah made from Elgin and Greyton fruit is more grounded. And it has all those like Northern Rhone kind of spicy, trippy, you know, like herbaceous but not green, savory elements along with all the red fruit. And yet it has and mid palate, and it's just comforting. It's just like a nice wine. And so I sometimes say to people, they're like, should I, you know, spend the money and buy your estate reserve? And I'm like, what do you want? Then I listen to them, I'm like, no, man, get the Syrah. It's really nice, you know? So yeah, so does that answer your question?
Beautifully.
Okay.
It's interesting how, like, what really hit me at that dinner was when we were talking about how diverse the terroir is in South Africa, and therefore, you know, how redundant it is when people say, oh yeah, 2015 was like a great vintage, or this was a great, because like, it really does depend on, you can't just have these blanket statements, basically, and that's what I really came away with. Like, I mean, I've never been like dictated by vintage anyway, because I tend to like wines definitely from France and Italy and the uncool vintages to like, but so I always think whatever, you know. But I mean, what would you agree that it's just totally dependent on the winemaker and where their site is?
It is, and this is one of the many life missions that I have, is to spread the word that South Africa is diverse. You know, France doesn't have a vintage. Nobody says Australia has a vintage. You know, it's regional. And a perfect vintage that I can give it as an example to everybody is 2016. 2016 was one of the most difficult vintages for our warmer climates, for the Swartland and for Stellenbosch, that anybody has seen. And yet in what is called the Cape South Coast, which is our cool climate area here in South Africa, which is a younger wine growing region, but it's very diverse and vast. We had the best vintage ever, from the health of the vineyards to the health of the grapes to the chemistry of the grapes to the yields. We had just an absolutely fantastic vintage. And in 2010, to go back far, Stellenbosch had the rainiest vintage in anybody's memory, and they suffered from rot and mildew, and they just struggled. And I had such a severe drought. I had no penetrable rainfall after November, and I didn't have a crop in 2010. My vineyards were too young. They wouldn't actually
No way.
flower. No, they wouldn't move from flower. They wouldn't go through veraison because I didn't have irrigation, and they were too young. And they just, I had, I think, like 5 barrels of wine or something. It just got blended into the next vintage. It wasn't even worth producing. And yet, and it was so dry on my farm. Back then, I didn't have the relationships to be able to tell the story of all of South Africa. But I remember that in particular, 2010 is a wet vintage that they really struggled. And for me, I had such a severe drought, I didn't have a crop. So I think it's very important that we start to send the message that we have such diverse terroir. We have big, ripe, bold wines, and they're done so well. And we have elegant light wines. We have, it's a spectrum. It wasn't always so. It's new. The cool climate areas are new. People have pioneered in the last 40 years, planting vineyards in more extreme places. But that is our story. And I want the world to understand that. So yeah, so you can't say South Africa has a vintage. I mean, sometimes people who sell my wine, they cut and paste the South African vintage of, let's say, 2016. And I call them like, that doesn't describe what happened to me. I mean, that has nothing to do with what happened on Lismore. So yeah. No.
I think
someone make brilliant wines and shit vintages, hey?
I think we are drinking the 2016 Syrah.
Oh, 16, not 17.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
16 was an awesome year. It was absolutely stunning. Stunning balance. So 16, 40% whole bunch. It was made the same way that I just said. It just had a less, I had a full month of maceration post-fermentation in 2017, where 16 had a shorter maceration. That's the only difference.
And someone's drinking your Pinot.
Oh, wow. Lucky you.
Yeah. Because how much Pinot do you make?
Not a lot. It was a dare. And it's like turned into a thing.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, that was a dare, and it's turned into a thing. But look, it's really fun. It's the scariest, most terrifying. The night before I picked my first Pinot, I couldn't sleep. I was like running through it, like as if I was going to go on stage, and over and over and over again. It's okay. So whoever is drinking your Pinot, the 17. Okay, good, because I wanted to know the vintage, because I only had I've only made Pinot 16, 17, 18. I made Pinot in 19, but obviously that's gone. That's gone poof into the air. So the 2017 is 50% from Elgin and 50 from the same vineyard that the Age of Grace comes from, and 50% from Walker Bay. And it's made with, in 17, it was made with about 30% whole cluster fermentation, a very long post soak. It was the first year in my new cellar, and so it got so much love and attention because I was finally in my own space for about, I started out under my house on the farm, for those of you who don't know. And in 2011, I outgrew that space. And so I moved and started renting space in bigger cellars for 6 years and drove all over the Western Cape with 70,000 kilometers a year on my driving, but learned a lot during that time. And in 2017, I had the most beautiful special cellar on Lismore, had a huge, bank debt with it, but it was worth it. And that 17 got lots of love. So about 25% new oak. I don't grow Pinot. My terroir on paper is perfectly suited to it. But now, knowing what I know 16 years later, I'm glad that I didn't plant it, because the conditions are just too harsh. It needs to be nurtured. And I don't think I'm very nurturing, frankly.
You like the less control side of things.
It's every man for himself on Lismore. Like everybody, like survival of the fittest,
I love how it started as a dare. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. If you had to work with one, like if you had to experiment with a grape, given all that you've learned over the last 16 years, what would you try?
Well, I have to say, one grape that I love drinking and that I really wanted to grow was Grenache Blanc. And I was kind of on a mission because I wanted to know if I could grow Grenache Blanc. So in 2015, I went on a pilgrimage to the Rhone, to the Northern Rhone, to Côte Rôtie. Why does it say my internet is unstable? It shouldn't be. My teenagers, if my internet's unstable, blame my kids. Okay. So I went on a pilgrimage to Côte Rôtie and looking for someone who could at least like show evidence that you could grow Grenache Blanc successfully in my climate. And I couldn't find anybody. So I went to visit a friend in Châteauneuf, and his dad, 5-generation winemaker in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and basically his father said to me, Grenache, white and red, need heat. And if you don't have heat to offer it, you will not be able to grow it successfully. And there was my answer. I went there for a reason. And then I went back to Côte Rôtie, and I got a call like, Jean-Paul Jamet can see you in 15 minutes, can you be there? It's like, I went and I hung out with Jean-Paul Jamet and Luc and for about 3 hours, and they gave me lots of their time. And long story short, he has a secret illegal Grenache Blanc vineyard planted up on the plateau. So I was like, here, like, this is my moment. And then he basically looks at me and he says, but I can't ripen it 3 out of 4 years. But you can make it, put it into your cuvee and it can be acidity. And then I was like, okay, yeah, no, I like that. Can't do that. So it's a long story to tell you that I would love to grow Grenache Blanc, but I can't. And I came back very clear with that. And I'm a believer in no longer just throwing, things to the wind. I needed to do my research. So I planted Roussanne and Marsanne.
Yay.
And they took a bit of a knock in the fire. 2020 was going to be the first year that I would make those wines. They were planted in 2016, and yeah, we'll see. Time will tell. There is about 1.5 hectare combined of Roussanne and Marsanne on Lismore. How much of it will make it through after the fire, I don't know.
Are other people making those great varieties as well? Like, is South Africa kind of a hotbed for trying new stuff and growing new things? Will we see it elsewhere other than just you?
For sure. Look, right now, my colleagues and even the more traditional farmers in Stellenbosch that you would think, would only grow the 6, kind of most popular varieties, everyone is experimenting. And Ibn Sadi, most famously. So I actually watched a podcast with him last night, and I have these things I hadn't even heard of from Greece and from, Eastern Europe. But ultimately there's an awareness in South Africa, first of all, that a lot of the stuff we have planted because it was trendy at a certain time, and that we might be able to make really profound wine with other grapes. And our terroir is so diverse that if you get the right grape in the right site, you might do something amazing. And so, a lot of people right now, a lot of my colleagues have some crazy stuff in experimental blocks. So I think you should watch this space. It might even be too much. The world will just be like, I'm overwhelmed by all this, all these options. South Africa's confusing. It's really, there's some great stuff happening, definitely.
Would you also say, like, not to be Debbie Downer, but like, could you say that some people, it's not just out of like a creative need, but actually just out of necessity due to the 4-year drought, that just certain grapes.
No, that's what I mean. It's like, obviously, like really dry, hot areas, have Sauvignon Blanc planted. Like, that's ridiculous, and there were a lot of bad planting decisions based on banking decisions. And, everybody thought they'd make very lucrative commercial things, and yet it just doesn't work. And so right now, that's exactly why Amelia, they're planting and experimenting with these things, because it's trying to now match site to variety and make better wine, grow better wine, not make better wine, but grow better wine. You don't have to push through the fact that your site actually wasn't really designed to grow great Chardonnay or to grow great, Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir shouldn't be there in a desert, and yet, there's some beautiful Portuguese and Greek varieties that are being experimented with that are growing like super profound wines. So it's matching grape to site and getting it right. And you only get it right through experimentation, and that takes years. I don't think the world, it's very easy to sit somewhere in, Europe or in America or outer space and say, oh, yes, I'm just not sure that, it's suited for this. Okay, well, that was, a 15-year experiment to try, because maybe it might have been amazing. My experiment, we did do a detailed terroir study, but it was educated guessing. We planted cool climate varieties, and yet it could have sucked, and that is the life work of wine, That's why I rather went to France to try to talk to somebody who could tell me that it would be a good idea to plant Grenache Blanc rather than wasting 15 years of my life. And I couldn't get anyone other than a cowboy. That was like, you're a cowboy, I'm a cowboy, like, do it. That's great. I was like, no, that's not. Yeah, I've been a cowboy enough. It's cool.
Do you have any insider tips? Is there anyone that we should be writing down of when we see this grape by this winemaker, we should grab it? Is there anything that you want to name?
No, I actually don't, because there's so many, and I have a feeling that they might actually hit the market kind of you know, en masse, because as I said, there's a lot of experimental stuff going on behind the scenes, and stuff that, you know, often I didn't even know that producer had planted that stuff 4 years ago, or, you know, whatever. I think all of a sudden the South African offering is going to become much more diverse, much more interesting.
My eureka moment, and I kind of had it actually at that Fat Butcher's dinner. I remember like even saying it to you, like I'd never really had the grape, I'm now going to pronounce it wrong, Sanso or Sinso.
Yeah, Sanso.
Say
Yeah.
potato, I say, yeah. And so that for me was a grape which, like, it's an amazing grape. It's like drought resistant, and it can just, it's so versatile, and I just saw it expressed in so many different ways, and its ageability is incredible. But I don't know, like that could potentially be a champion grape for South Africa maybe in like a few years' time.
Well, for sure, already it's happening, and there's a lot of Swartland winemakers in particular, and Stellenbosch winemakers, because they're older Senso grapes. I mean, sorry, vineyards.
Yeah.
There's older Senso vineyards. You know, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, Senso was actually blended with Cabernet Sauvignon in this country regularly, and so they're picking up that mantle and not necessarily blending it with Cabernet, but they're revisiting this grape.
Yeah. That was really exciting.
For sure, it's on the UK market. You can find some excellent examples.
That was
it's
a big takeaway for me last year.
Especially given the trend right now of lighter, brighter, fresher reds, it's a perfect one to look at. And from South Africa, you know, this weekend with your braai and your barbecue, if you can find there aren't any bad ones on the market right now. They're all from, you know, really cool winemakers who are pushing boundaries, and they're worth, you know, experimenting with for sure.
Are there any in the States?
For you in Los Angeles, there are actually. You know, I'm gonna push another importer other than my, but I mean, Broadbent obviously has a lot of wine in Los Angeles. When I was there, I saw it, and they have a couple in their portfolio for sure.
Right. Thank you. Phew. Can get my Sanso cake, yay.
We've talked about your Chardonnay and Viognier. You talked about Marsanne, Roussanne, and your love for white Grenache. What about kind of the more lighter, delicate styles like a Semillon? Would you be interested, you know, do you love those wines as well? Do you think you might make something like that?
Like a what? I'm sorry, like a Semillon?
Semillon, yeah.
You know, there's a part of me that would love to play around with everything. And I think that's a rabbit hole that a lot of winemakers get drawn down. And I've tried really hard to resist that, because I'm only one person. And in the end, I have to sell these wines. And so I would love to make everything. I mean, wouldn't it be so cool if every year I could bring in just small batches? I mean, you guys can't imagine how awesome it is that you bring in grapes. All the grapes, they're all red or black, and then those ones are all green with like various little tints of whatever, and they look like grapes, they taste like kind of grapes, and then all you do is let it ferment, and it blows your mind with like how different, you know, those grapes became like Sauvignon with like pineapple and grass and a whole bunch of stuff, and these grapes became Viognier with peaches, but that Viognier actually has apricot. I mean, it is so amazing. And if we could just spend our life like experimenting with all these different batches, like my most favorite winemaker, Peter Falzer, Blank Bottle, does. He's the only guy who somehow can manage all those batches and bottle them. Okay.
How many grapes does he work with? Like 23 or something ridiculous?
Yeah, he is amazing. Not only do I adore him, but I envy him, because I wish I could do that. You know, but in the end, I'm one person. You know, all winemakers have their limitations in, you know, in whatever shape or form. And so I have to show resistance. Like and I really resist the temptation. I mean, obviously it would be so easy to just find a beautiful Semillon vineyard and like to start making that. It would be awesome. And I was even telling Tim, as you guys said, that like winemakers were sending me text message, I've got some Riesling, do you want it this year? You know, everyone is trying to help. I've got some Merlot, I've got some, you know, this, I've got that. And I had hired an assistant right before the fire, God bless her. And I looked at her and I was like, wouldn't this be awesome if I was in my own cellar and I could like make all these amazing things? But yeah, yes, I want to. I'm going to try to resist the temptation to try to just do what I do better. But I adore it for any. Sorry. Yeah, I just want to make a plug because for any of you who haven't tasted blank bottle wines, like you haven't lived, and you need to, and if you haven't met him, you really haven't lived. And so go to a South African wine show and make sure you find him because he just is incredible. And the fact that he can juggle all of the wines that he makes, he does small batch of lots of different things and pulls it off, and all of the wines are great. It's incredible.
And he still fits in time to be like an amazing surfer.
Yeah. No, and a dad. He's got lots of kids.
And a dad, yeah.
No. Like I said, I envy him, I admire him. Yeah, but I'm not him. Yeah.
You're not him, you're not you. You are you, and we love you. Yeah. We love your wines. And we got one more question about the Chardonnay, which was, can you talk about the reserve Chardonnay that you have?
Yes. So when I introduced the standard Chardonnay earlier, I mentioned that I don't use new oak and that I work with 300-liter barrels. So what I did was I shifted and experimented with large format 500-liter barrels. So they're big. I mean, they're like, a meter tall. And there was something so profound that happened with that move. And obviously there's some new oak in the reserve Chardonnay for those of you who've had it. It's about 30% new oak. But the barrels are so big, the surface area is not that much. So the wood is really beautifully integrated. But what's so cool is to take the same grape juice from like the same vineyards and just even the size of the vessel, to put it into smaller barrels. You have more, a greater relationship with the oxygen. And then you put it into big barrels and there's less surface area, so there's less of a relationship with oxygen. And to see the way the exact same juice goes in a totally different direction. So with the normal Lismore Chardonnay that you guys tasted tonight, that citrus is more marmalade. It's a really like intense, concentrated, but slightly vague citrus, with that like intensity and that sweetness and that pithiness of marmalade. Where the estate reserve in large barrels, 30% oak, actually have like clear, distinctive lime. And because of now this is proper toastiness, not like brown bread, like toastiness without butter. Like because of the new oak, there's toastiness, but it's like charred lime. Like putting a lime on the barbecue, or when you have, Thai food or anybody's had a proper fish taco, which only Amelia right now living in Los Angeles has had that. A proper fish taco with a charred lime. It's so intense and it's so mind-blowing. And and just like the relationship between the reserve Syrah and the normal Syrah, it's not that one's better. They're totally different. I mean, the Chardonnay, the reserve Chardonnay is next level, but it's not always the wine you want. Sometimes you just want the brown bread toasty marmalade, nice 2-bottle Lismore. But the reserve Chardonnay just takes that up a notch, and it's made in only big barrels, and it's just really special. Yeah. Again, a showcase of my terroir, which makes me so proud. It's my life's work.
What an amazing, amazing testament to a life. Having this, I miss your wine so much. I need to all this talk. I need to somehow find some delivery service.
I'm in Los Angeles. I can't think of where right now, but there is. It's in.
Yeah, I'll hunt them down. Don't worry.
Yeah. I'll find. There's a guy that I know that I can call. I'll find him and let him.
I love it.
Yeah, you'll get the wines, Amelia. You'll find them. I'm sure you can.
I'll find a way. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. It's been such a joy to speak with you and hear about these amazing wines, and also the wines that we haven't tasted tonight that I'm sure people will be seeking out now because they just sound fantastic, and such a broad range of styles as well for somewhere that you don't think of having such a wide variety, because you keep talking about the cool climate, but you've obviously managed to make such a wide range of styles, which is fantastic. So yeah, everyone please keep buying Lismore wines, because you know, we love them, we love Sam, we want to see more of her wine, so the more that we can help now, the more we'll see down the road. Yeah. And then next week, Amelia and I are talking to Hamish Clark at St Clair, so a trio of New Zealand wines. So hopefully you guys will join us for that next week as well. All details on Princess and the Pinot website as per usual. Just wanted to check if there are any more comments, questions. Getting a lot of love in the chat box, so you know, I don't know if you've been reading that as you've been going along, Sam, because of
there's too much stimulus overload, like to watch it all.
But it's a lot of love, it's a lot of love. Yeah, everyone's really enjoying these wines, but also hearing your passion for your winemaking, which is, you know, what we wanted to bring across and get people to hear about. So thank you.
I want to thank everybody for sticking in with this long kind of babbling of me, because I tend to do that. And thank you guys, hey, for pulling this together and for pulling me into it. I really appreciate it. And yeah, at this time in particular, thanks for the support. And thank you, yeah, to everyone for being here.
Amazing.
So wonderful having you. Well, thank you so much. I know, I'm like, oh, I need to.
Big internet hug. Like,
I know. I'm just like this.
Pre-COVID hug.
Oh, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and thank you, Soma, for hosting amazingly, and thank you, Sam, for being with us. This was a real highlight. I was looking forward to it, and it actually exceeded my expectations. So,
thank you so much. Speak to you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.